Time, in the eyes of Charlie, was never just a number on a calendar. It was the truest accountant, the one that never lied, never forgot, and always compounded its verdict. He often said he could have been twice as rich if he hadn't made one foolish mistake 50 years ago. That wasn't self-pity or performance. It was mathematics. Compounding, after all, works both ways, on wisdom and on stupidity, on patience and on haste. Charlie had spent a lifetime observing how small decisions, good or bad, become empires or ruins when stretched across decades. The world loves to praise brilliance, the grand idea, the bold risk, the clever move. But time doesn't reward brilliance as much as it punishes folly. Every success story, he believed, was just the visible tip of a mountain of avoided disasters. By the time a person reaches 50, the arithmetic of life begins to reveal itself. The big moves, the grand experiments, the wild gambles, they're mostly behind. Your career has settled into its shape. Your relationships, your habits, even your health, all have momentum that is difficult to reverse. The window for reinvention narrows, and what once felt like an open horizon becomes a set of well-defined paths. But Charlie never saw that as a tragedy. He saw it as clarity. When you're young, the world tempts you with infinite possibilities, most of which are traps disguised as opportunity. When you're older, you can finally see what truly matters. Not expansion, but endurance. Not chasing more, but protecting what you've built. He once said that after 50, brilliance is overrated. What you need is the ability to avoid disaster. The young can afford to be bold because they have time to heal. The older cannot, because recovery itself becomes a luxury. At that stage, the goal shifts from ambition to preservation, from offense to defense. In his own quiet way, Charlie made peace with that arithmetic. He didn't need to win the race anymore. He just needed to finish it standing. To him, survival, financial, emotional, even moral, was the ultimate mark of intelligence. He had seen too many lives undone not by lack of talent, but by lack of restraint. Too many brilliant minds who mistook energy for wisdom, confidence for competence. The market, he liked to say, doesn't punish ignorance nearly as harshly as it punishes arrogance. So he learned to live by subtraction, removing folly instead of chasing genius. Time would do the rest. That was his quiet secret. The older he grew, the less he needed to know, and the more he needed to avoid knowing the wrong things. It was, in a sense, the purest form of wisdom, the kind that looks unimpressive in youth, but magnificent in hindsight. By the time Charlie crossed 50, he had already seen the full theater of ambition, the rise and fall of men who wanted everything, and the quiet endurance of those who simply wanted to last. He once joked that ambition was a young man's game, not because it wasn't useful, but because it often came with blindness, the inability to recognize when enough was enough. The tragedy of many great careers, he thought, wasn't failure. It was the refusal to stop winning. In youth, the world seduces you with the myth of perpetual ascent. Every success is an invitation to chase the next, every victory a seed of future exhaustion. But after 50, the rhythm changes. You begin to understand that the point of the game isn't to keep climbing, it's to keep standing. Charlie often compared life to investing in a fragile company, yourself. When you're young, you can take aggressive bets because the enterprise is small and flexible. But as you grow older, you carry more debt, more dependencies, more people who count on your survival. A reckless move at 20 might be an anecdote. At 60, it can destroy a lifetime. Defense, to Charlie, wasn't cowardice. It was maturity. It was the awareness that losses hurt more than gains please, and that the true compounding of life comes not from boldness, but from the quiet discipline of avoiding ruin. He had seen it everywhere: the investor who overreached, the entrepreneur who couldn't stop expanding, the family that mistook luxury for wealth. They all played offense when defense would have served them better. By middle age, your greatest risks are rarely external. They're internal: pride, impatience, envy, overconfidence. The same qualities that fueled early success now become threats. The same fire that built the empire begins to burn the foundation. So Charlie's philosophy evolved. He stopped trying to be the smartest in the room and focused on being the most reasonable. He stopped trying to predict the next big thing and worked to avoid the next big mistake. He loved to say that rational beats brilliant, because rationality endures when brilliance self-destructs. Defense, in that sense, is not about fear. It's about respect. Respect for time, for probability, for the unseen forces that humble every empire. He learned to structure life like a well-built portfolio, not dependent on one outcome, not exposed to one disaster, and not hostage to the madness of others. He diversified not only his investments, but his identity, so that no single failure could define him. And as the decades rolled on, he noticed something paradoxical. The less he chased, the more he gained. The more he protected, the more he grew. Defense, it turned out, was the ultimate form of offense, because those who survive long enough eventually outlast everyone who doesn't. In markets and in life, compounding rewards the patient far more than the ambitious. You don't need to be extraordinary. You just need to stay in the game long enough for the arithmetic to favor you. After 50, Charlie's ambitions no longer pointed outward. They turned inward, toward mastery of character, clarity of thought, and serenity in decision. He had seen how external success often came with internal chaos, and he preferred the opposite: a modest fortune with a calm mind. He came to believe that the greatest luxury in old age wasn't wealth or status, but simplicity. The ability to wake up without fear, without debt, without needing to impress anyone. And that, he thought, was the highest return life could offer. Charlie once said that envy was the only deadly sin that offered no pleasure, and yet it ruled most of the modern world. He had seen fortunes built and ruined, companies rise and collapse, all because of one simple inability: the failure to be content with enough. It was never poverty that destroyed people. It was comparison. The moment someone else's success became your reference point, your peace began to erode. To Charlie, envy was not just a moral flaw. It was a miscalculation, a distortion in judgment that made people forget the invisible costs behind visible wealth. The flashy house came with sleepless debt. The grand title came with invisible pressure. The man you envied was often envying someone else. In his younger years, Charlie had felt the temptation too. He had seen Warren make decisions that seemed effortless, bold, precise, and almost prophetic. And yet, instead of competing, he chose to admire. That small act of humility spared him decades of bitterness. He often told younger investors that the world would tempt them to measure success horizontally, against peers, rivals, neighbors, rather than vertically, against their own potential. But horizontal measurement was a trap, because there was always someone higher, always a new comparison, always another hill to climb. The danger of envy, he said, was that it disguised itself as motivation. It looked like ambition at first, the urge to do more, to be more. But slowly it turned toxic. You start playing games you can't win, chasing numbers that have no meaning, buying things you don't need to impress people you don't even like. He once described envy as a tax on peace of mind. It costs you energy, joy, and gratitude. but gives you nothing in return. Over the years, Charlie learned to view success less as a race and more as a personal equilibrium, a balance between desire and contentment. He had watched too many people who won financially, but lost emotionally. Their portfolios grew, but their serenity vanished. The irony, he thought, was that the simplest way to get rich emotionally was to stop measuring altogether. When envy disappears, gratitude takes its place, and gratitude, unlike ambition, compounds daily. He admired how Warren had managed to maintain this clarity. Warren's wealth didn't change his habits. The same house, the same breakfast, the same rhythm of work. It was an act of defiance against a culture addicted to more. To the outside world, that looked eccentric. But to Charlie, it was genius. Because the man who is content is untouchable. He cannot be manipulated, sold to, or pressured. His sense of value comes from within, not from the scoreboard of others. Charlie often reflected on how envy had warped the markets, the media, and even society. Everyone was running faster but feeling poorer. Everyone was comparing their behind the scenes to someone else's highlight reel. The result wasn't progress, it was exhaustion. He believed that most economic mistakes were psychological before they were financial. People didn't go broke from lack of income, but from lack of contentment. They couldn't stop reaching, couldn't stop proving, couldn't stop envying. So, he practiced subtraction again. He avoided environments that triggered envy, the circles of showmanship, the echo chambers of self-congratulation. He chose simplicity, not because it was noble, but because it was sane. He understood that the richest feeling in the world wasn't superiority, it was sufficiency. And in that quiet satisfaction, he found something rarer than wealth: peace. If Charlie had a religion, it was the study of error. He believed mistakes were not just inevitable, they were essential. The key was not to avoid them entirely, but to ensure they never became fatal. Life, he said, was best lived like a prudent investor. You expect to be wrong sometimes, but you survive long enough for your right decisions to outweigh the wrong ones. He called it the arithmetic of patience. The world celebrates speed, but compounding, in wealth, in wisdom, in relationships, happens quietly, invisibly, and over unreasonable stretches of time. Charlie understood that. He learned that good judgment comes from experience, and experience comes mostly from bad judgment. The trick was to keep your errors small and your lessons large. In the early days, he and Warren made their share of foolish investments. They bought companies that looked cheap on paper but were cheap for a reason. They trusted managers they shouldn't have. They underestimated how hard it is to fix a bad business and how easy it is to ruin a good one. But each mistake became a small tuition fee in the university of life. They paid, they learned, and they adjusted. Slowly, patterns emerged. Human behavior, greed, fear, cycles that repeated with astonishing reliability. Charlie began to realize that intelligence mattered less than temperament. Smart people failed all the time because they couldn't stay rational when everyone else was losing their minds. He liked to say, "It's not supposed to be easy. If it were easy, everyone would be rich." But what he meant was deeper. That difficulty is the filter that keeps the impatient out. Patience to him was not passive waiting. It was active endurance, the discipline to do nothing when nothing needed doing, and the courage to act when others froze. He compared compounding to growing a tree. You can't accelerate the process by pulling on the branches. You water it, protect it, and let time do the heavy lifting. Most people quit before the roots even take hold. In investing, the math is merciless. If you lose 50%, you need 100% to get back to even. But the same principle applies to life. A few big mistakes in health, in character, in relationships can take years to recover from. So the wise avoid disaster, even if it means missing excitement. Charlie's philosophy of compounding extended far beyond money. He believed that character compounds too. Small acts of integrity, practiced consistently, build reputations that open invisible doors. Habits compound into health. Knowledge compounds into wisdom. The tragedy, he thought, was that most people interrupt their own compounding. They can't sit still. They change strategies, careers, partners, investments. They start over before momentum can build. In doing so, they trade slow, certain progress for the illusion of control. Charlie had learned to respect the pace of reality. He didn't demand outcomes on his schedule. He let time be the ally. He said that compounding works best when you don't notice it, when you stop checking the score every day. The same applies to learning. Wisdom grows beneath awareness, accumulating quietly as long as you keep showing up and avoid catastrophe. His partnership with Warren was itself a masterpiece of compounding. Decades of shared reasoning, mutual trust, and aligned temperament created a synergy that no amount of individual brilliance could match. Looking back, Charlie would often say that the greatest lesson wasn't how to win big, but how to lose small. How to endure mistakes without bitterness, to view each setback as a deposit in the bank of understanding. In time, that attitude itself compounded into calm, the serenity of someone who no longer fears being wrong because he knows he will outlast his errors. To Charlie, the arithmetic of life was simple but unforgiving. Avoid ruin. Learn continuously. Let time multiply what you've preserved. And if you do that long enough, the results, financial and otherwise, take care of themselves. Charlie often said that the most valuable phrase in investing, and in life, was the simple admission, "I don't know." It was a lesson that most people never learned, because humility feels like weakness. In a culture obsessed with certainty, confidence, and the appearance of control, admitting ignorance is counterintuitive. Yet Charlie had discovered that the willingness to say, "I don't know," is the secret to avoiding catastrophic mistakes. He had watched countless people, brilliant by any standard, destroy themselves because they acted as if they understood everything. They predicted interest rates, currency movements, the next market darling, all with conviction that dazzled spectators but destroyed their portfolios. Confidence, he noticed, often disguised incompetence. Charlie and Warren built Berkshire with the opposite philosophy. They understood a few things deeply: insurance, consumer products, and certain service industries. And they ignored everything else. They passed on thousands of opportunities, not out of laziness, but out of discipline. If they didn't understand it, they didn't touch it. This restraint became their superpower. They avoided disasters that the supposedly smart investors stumbled into. Overconfidence, Charlie knew, is a silent tax on wealth. It compels you to act where you should observe, to bet when you should wait, and to gamble when patience would have rewarded you. Saying "I don't know" does more than prevent losses. It clarifies the field. It creates focus. It forces you to stay within your circle of competence. That circle, Charlie emphasized, is not a cage. It's a safe harbor. Inside it, your knowledge compounds. Outside it, your ignorance can explode. Charlie liked to illustrate this with stories from ordinary people. A lawyer, brilliant in his field, decided he could predict currencies. A few confident trades wiped out decades of savings. A doctor, humble about what he didn't know, kept his money in steady, reliable dividend-paying stocks, and quietly became financially free. The difference wasn't genius, it was humility. He also observed the psychology behind certainty. People prefer the comfort of opinion to the discomfort of honesty. Saying, "I don't know," feels incomplete, weak, or even embarrassing. Yet, Charlie argued, it is the most courageous answer because it acknowledges reality. Reality, after all, is the final arbiter. Pretending otherwise is a fast track to ruin. The humility of uncertainty allows you to survive long enough for the arithmetic of compounding to reward you. The impatient, the arrogant, the know-it-alls burn themselves out. They chase trends, speculate recklessly, and measure their worth by the illusions of control. The humble, however, endure, and the universe eventually compensates endurance with results. Charlie believed that wisdom lies in boundaries, not breadth. Knowing what you can't know protects more than striving to know it all. It channels effort toward actions that are likely to succeed and shields from actions that are likely to fail. It's not exciting. It doesn't make headlines. It doesn't draw envy or applause. But when the decades pass and markets rise and fall, the patient and humble investor emerges largely unscathed, if not quietly prosperous. He liked to say that admitting ignorance is not an abdication of responsibility. It's a recognition of reality. The world is far too complex, far too unpredictable for any one person to understand it all. The only way to win is to know what you understand and what you don't, and then behave accordingly. In that simple practice, saying, "I don't know," Charlie found freedom. Freedom from impulsive risk, freedom from envy, and freedom from the endless, exhausting need to prove oneself. And in that freedom, wealth finds its quietest, most reliable form. Charlie often reflected on the subtle, almost invisible difference between being an owner and being an employee. It wasn't about job titles, income, or prestige. It was about mindset, about how one approaches effort, risk, and reward. He had observed brilliant professionals throughout his life. Lawyers who could dissect contracts in seconds, bankers who could price risk with uncanny precision, executives who ran companies with a mix of intuition and calculation. They earned well, often very well. Yet, the moment they stopped showing up, the flow of money stopped too. Their wealth was dependent entirely on their presence, their energy, their daily labor. In Charlie's eyes, that was not true wealth. It was a treadmill, elegant perhaps, but inescapable. Ownership, by contrast, was about leverage. It was about creating systems, stakes, and investments that worked independently of one's immediate involvement. The ideal asset, he believed, produces while you sleep, while you read, while you walk or play golf. It compounds quietly, unbothered by moods, headlines, or minor crises. Ownership turns time into an ally rather than a wage slave. Charlie often compared it to planting an orchard. You could either pick fruit yourself every day, laboring endlessly, or you could plant trees that bear fruit for decades, long after your hands grow tired. The difference is subtle but profound. One is fleeting, the other enduring. He admired how Warren approached ownership. Warren focused on acquiring businesses and assets that had durability, intrinsic value, and resilience. Together, they selected companies not for glamour, but for permanence. Enterprises that would continue producing long after their initial purchase. Charlie noticed that most people confuse income with wealth. A high salary might feel like security, but without ownership, it's temporary. Without compounding, without autonomy, it's a fragile construct. It vanishes when you can no longer work, when industries shift, when personal health declines. Income is a stream. Ownership is a reservoir. One dries up, the other endures. He often said that the power of ownership is also psychological. It transforms perspective. Owners think in decades, employees in weeks or months. Owners focus on survival and sustainability. Employees focus on approval, recognition, or immediate gains. The mindset shapes every decision, every risk taken, every dollar spent. Charlie and Warren deliberately built a life that leaned heavily on ownership. It wasn't glamorous. Nobody clapped when they bought stakes in insurance companies or consumer brands. But every dividend, every profit, every well-timed acquisition reinforced a quiet, unshakable independence. They had created an ecosystem that was largely self-sustaining. He also recognized the trap of careerism. People optimize for titles, bonuses, or social admiration. But those things don't compound. They're ephemeral. Once the applause fades, the treadmill remains, and you realize too late that you've built nothing of lasting substance. Ownership compounds. Careerism does not. By midlife, Charlie had learned to measure his own success not in recognition, but in the stability and longevity of his assets. Did they work for him when he wasn't working? Did they survive recessions and cycles, generating value silently? If yes, he considered it a victory. If not, no accolade could compensate for the exposure and risk he bore. He often urged younger investors to consider the same question. Do you own anything that will continue to work for you when you're not there? Real estate that pays rent, stocks that pay dividends, businesses with durable demand. Without these, no level of talent or labor will buy freedom. In the end, Charlie's lesson was elegant in its simplicity. True wealth is autonomous. It's not measured by what you earn today, but by what persists after decades of time and uncertainty. And the only way to achieve it is through ownership, thoughtfully, patiently, and without surrendering to the illusions of immediate reward. Charlie's worldview was forged in fire. He was born in 1924, and by the time he was a child, the world around him had already collapsed into chaos. Banks failed, businesses shuttered, families went hungry, and entire communities struggled just to survive. This was not a distant economic lesson from a textbook. It was reality, experienced in every day, in every corner of life. He often said that living through the Great Depression left an indelible mark on his understanding of risk, resilience, and the true meaning of security. Most people today think volatility is a market drop of 10% or 20%. For Charlie, volatility had teeth. In 1932, the stock market had fallen nearly 90% from its peak. That wasn't a dip. That was annihilation. He remembered men he had known as steady, hard-working, intelligent, and disciplined, suddenly destitute. Families who had been self-sufficient moved in together because no one could afford rent. Communities fractured, but also quietly, they endured. Charlie saw that survival was not about brilliance. It was about durability. Durability was the real lesson of those years. He learned early that the cleverest, the flashiest, and the boldest operators could disappear overnight, while the modest, frugal, and adaptable survived. The survivors weren't necessarily the smartest. They were the ones who respected reality, who didn't borrow too much, who didn't assume good times would last. Charlie carried this philosophy into every decision he ever made. He understood that good times were not guaranteed, that prosperity was not the default. Civilizations rise and fall, markets boom and crash. The natural state of the world is uncertainty. To ignore that truth is to invite disaster. Debt, he realized, was the single most dangerous lever during good times. People assumed stability, borrowed excessively, and lost everything when the cycle turned. He despised leverage not out of fear, but because he had seen its consequences firsthand. With no debt, one could weather the storm. With debt, the storm was terminal. He also recognized the quiet power of small, boring businesses. During the Depression, he watched candy stores, small insurance agencies, and modest shops survive while glamorous, complex ventures evaporated. These survivors weren't spectacular. They didn't inspire awe. But they endured. That endurance, he realized, was the closest thing to invincibility in a world of uncertainty. Charlie carried this lesson into investing with Warren. They sought businesses that were simple, understandable, and capable of surviving downturns. They didn't chase glamour or speculation. They sought durability, the ability to endure adversity, maintain operations, and even thrive when chaos struck around them. He often reflected that the Depression had given him an invaluable gift, a deep respect for reality. Optimism was fine, but blind optimism was deadly. You could dream big, but you had to build your foundations on something that would survive the inevitable storm. From hardship, he learned patience, caution, and humility. He learned that wealth is not about quick wins or brilliance. It is about surviving long enough for compounding, consistency, and prudence to do their work. And so, the mark of the Great Depression was not just financial, it was philosophical. It taught him that life, like markets, favors the durable, the rational, and the patient. Those qualities, more than genius or luck, define who endures and who vanishes. Charlie often described his approach to life and investing as a philosophy of subtraction. He wasn't interested in complexity, spectacle, or shortcuts. Instead, he focused on removing the things that could destroy him: debt, drama, and dumb decisions. Debt, he believed, was poison. It magnifies mistakes, erodes patience, and creates pressure that clouds judgment. Charlie had seen families, communities, and entire businesses crumble under the weight of borrowed money. The temptation to leverage returns is powerful, the illusion of speed, the mirage of opportunity, but the consequences are cruel. With debt, a single misstep becomes catastrophic. Without it, mistakes are survivable. Drama was another silent destroyer. Charlie observed brilliant people undone not by bad investments, but by conflict, chaos, and emotional turbulence. Personal feuds, messy partnerships, impulsive disputes, they all consume energy that could be used to think clearly, act rationally, and endure patiently. The smartest man in the world can be financially ruined if he cannot avoid the storms of unnecessary drama. The third danger, Charlie called dumb decisions, was deceptively simple. He didn't mean low intelligence, but recklessness. Decisions made without understanding, without reflection, without regard for long-term consequences. He had seen colleagues fall into scams, speculative ventures, and flashy deals, seduced by promises that were too good to be true. Intelligence alone cannot protect you from human folly. Only discipline can. Charlie's principle was radical in its simplicity. Cut everything that doesn't serve survival, growth, or stability. This discipline of subtraction is the opposite of the culture of addition that surrounds most people. We are taught to acquire more assets, more income, more connections, more recognition. But each addition carries hidden risks. The more you add without discretion, the more you expose yourself to ruin. By subtracting, Charlie created clarity. Each decision became easier. Every investment was measured against 3 questions. Does it require debt? Does it invite drama? Does it expose me to stupidity? If the answer was yes to any, he walked away. He applied this not only to finance, but to people and partnerships. Friends, colleagues, and partners were chosen for their rationality, patience, and integrity. Those who amplified chaos, greed, or folly were politely excluded. The goal wasn't to be cold or unkind. It was to preserve energy, focus, and longevity. Charlie often contrasted his approach with those obsessed with addition. People chase hot investments, high salaries, or prestige, accumulating complexity and risk in the process. They believe more is better, until one misstep sends it all crashing down. Subtraction, by contrast, is quiet, unglamorous, and immensely powerful. It protects you when luck turns against you. It allows compounding to work without interference. The philosophy of subtraction extends beyond finance. Living below one's means, avoiding unnecessary consumption, and choosing relationships and activities carefully are all part of the same principle. Every unnecessary dollar spent, every wasted hour, every toxic connection is a reduction in survival margin. By subtracting, Charlie ensured that what remained was durable, resilient, and capable of compounding quietly over decades. In essence, the discipline of subtraction is a shield. It is the framework that allows rational decisions to flourish, protects against disaster, and gives time the chance to work its quiet magic. It is simple to understand, yet incredibly difficult for most to practice consistently. And in the life of someone over 50, Charlie would say, it is not optional, it is essential. Charlie understood that wealth, like a building, is constructed not only from bricks and mortar, but also from the strength and alignment of its foundation. For him, one of the most critical foundations was partnership. But not just any partnership. It had to be rational, disciplined, and durable. His collaboration with Warren was legendary, not because it was perfect, but because it was principled. They shared temperament, values, and vision. They trusted each other implicitly, and that trust created efficiency and clarity that few organizations ever experience. Energy that might have been wasted on suspicion, ego, or politics was instead devoted to the patient accumulation of value. Charlie observed that most partnerships fail, not due to market forces or luck, but because of human dynamics. Pride, greed, insecurity, and impatience corrode alliances from within. A brilliant investor can be destroyed by a partner who amplifies emotional impulses or invites chaos. Conversely, a steady, disciplined partner multiplies effectiveness far beyond what any individual could achieve. He often emphasized that compatibility mattered more than brilliance. Two highly intelligent people with misaligned temperaments are often worse than one intelligent person acting alone. Rational collaboration, Charlie believed, is not about matching skills perfectly. It's about creating a shared framework for thinking, deciding, and enduring. It is about minimizing risk through alignment, not maximizing ego or recognition. Their method was simple. They chose partners who brought stability, complemented strengths, and mitigated weaknesses. If a partner created drama, encouraged debt, or indulged reckless behavior, Charlie would avoid them as ruthlessly as he avoided bad investments. Every partnership was measured by one question: does this person make me more rational or less? He also observed that patience and temperament are far more valuable than intelligence. Markets, economies, and businesses are unpredictable. The person who thrives is not always the smartest, but the one who reacts least to noise, who maintains discipline, and who avoids self-sabotage. The right partnership amplifies those traits. Charlie often drew a line between luck and partnership. Luck can create short-term gains, but a strong, rational partnership creates enduring wealth. Over decades, aligned partners compound their advantages quietly, steadily, like two gardeners tending a forest, rather than a single person planting a few scattered seeds. He also acknowledged the inevitability of mistakes. Even the best partnerships encounter errors. What matters is shared principles and temperament that prevent one misstep from becoming catastrophic. The combination of rationality, patience, and trust creates a buffer that protects against the inevitable shocks of business and life. Charlie's lesson for anyone over 50 was clear. Choose your collaborators wisely. Surround yourself with those who improve your decision-making, who reinforce your discipline, and who share your long-term vision. Avoid those who amplify chaos, impatience, or greed. One wrong partner can undo decades of careful work. The right one can multiply it exponentially. In the architecture of rational collaboration, temperament is the foundation, shared principles are the pillars, and trust is the cement. Charlie and Warren understood this implicitly, and it became one of the quietest, most powerful engines of their enduring success. Charlie often described life after 50 as the late game. It was no longer a contest of speed, daring, or dazzling intelligence. It was a test of endurance, patience, and the quiet art of not making catastrophic mistakes. In these years, survival is not just practical, it is strategic. By 50, most people's offensive years are behind them. The time for risky gambles, high-octane speculation, and chasing fame or fortune has passed. Careers are largely set, families are established, and the margin for error in finances is smaller than it ever will be again. The goal is not brilliance, it is preservation. The objective is to remain solvent, to maintain independence, and to protect dignity. Charlie often observed that many of his peers misunderstood this transition. They looked at the wealth, success, or flamboyant lifestyles of others and felt an urgent need to catch up. They invested in speculative schemes, startups, or hot-trending assets without understanding the risks. The result was predictable: losses, stress, and regret. The late game does not reward envy or impulsivity. It punishes them. Survival, Charlie noted, is not merely about avoiding ruin. It is about creating a platform for continued compounding. Every dollar preserved after 50 is far more valuable than a dollar earned recklessly. Wealth built in the late game is quiet, patient, and unglamorous. It comes from steady dividends, reliable businesses, and assets that endure across cycles of boom and bust. He often contrasted two types of investors at this stage of life. One is the impatient, flashy speculator, chasing trends, reacting to every headline, and letting emotion drive decisions. The other is the steady, disciplined individual who prioritizes safety, simplicity, and the preservation of capital. Over decades, the disciplined investor invariably outlasts the speculator. The market may reward excitement in the short term, but it always punishes recklessness in the long term. Charlie also emphasized the human element in the late game. It is not just money at stake, it is dignity. Independence in later years, the ability to live without relying on others, to maintain personal freedom, and to avoid financial desperation, is priceless. All the clever trades, speculative wins, or rapid gains in earlier decades mean little if they are erased by one poorly timed decision after 50. In practical terms, the late game is about discipline, avoiding leverage, minimizing unnecessary risks, focusing on reliable income streams, and ignoring the noise of financial hype. It is about preserving the fruits of decades of labor, not gambling them on fleeting opportunities. Charlie liked to remind people that compounding is a long, quiet process, and survival is its prerequisite. No brilliant idea can overcome catastrophic losses. No ingenuity can replace lost decades of patient growth. By focusing on endurance, simplicity, and rational restraint, one ensures that wealth, and with it dignity, remains intact. In the late game, Charlie believed, the measure of success is not how fast you grow, but how carefully you preserve. It is the difference between fleeting excitement and lasting security, between stress and peace. between dependency and independence. The late game is, ultimately, about living well while sustaining the freedom to choose your own life, your own pace, and your own priorities. As Charlie reflected on decades of investing, partnerships, and life, he returned again and again to a simple, almost stubborn principle: the art of not being stupid. Wealth, he often said, is less about brilliance or luck and more about avoiding fatal mistakes. It is about knowing when to act and, far more importantly, when not to act. Charlie believed that most people overcomplicate life and finance. They chase excitement, envy others' successes, and fall into the trap of believing that bigger, faster, or flashier equals better. But the truth, he insisted, is much simpler. Life after 50 is not about catching up. It is about staying standing. It is about preserving what you have built, letting compounding work its quiet magic, and understanding that restraint often outperforms audacity. He frequently spoke of the philosophy of enough. Enough is having what sustains you, what preserves dignity, what allows freedom and choice. It is not opulence, nor is it indulgence. It is the clarity that comes with realizing that chasing more income, more recognition, more thrill, often jeopardizes everything that matters. Enough is a protective lens, a shield against envy, impulsivity, and hubris. Envy, Charlie observed, is one of the deadliest forces in finance. It seduces even the most rational mind into reckless action, drawing attention away from personal priorities toward the mirage of others' successes. The late game is littered with examples of people who ruined decades of careful accumulation because they wanted to match or surpass someone else's fortune. The lesson is clear. Your retirement does not care what someone else earned. Your family does not care. Only your ego cares. And your ego is a terrible investment advisor. Charlie distilled the art of not being stupid into concrete behaviors. Live below your means, avoid debt, ignore drama, refuse to chase trends, and invest only in what you understand. He emphasized patience above all else. The world offers endless temptations, speculative assets, flashy opportunities, complex schemes. Each one carries the risk of permanent loss. Discipline is the only safeguard. He also stressed that mistakes are inevitable. The important thing is to prevent catastrophic ones. Human nature cannot be eradicated, and markets will always offer opportunities for foolishness. The goal is not to be perfect, but to survive, endure, and allow compounding to work uninterrupted. Every dollar preserved, every misstep avoided, strengthens the foundation for long-term security. Charlie's reflections often circled back to the quiet, patient accumulation of wealth. Owning durable businesses, investing in reliable assets, maintaining independence, and building a life where compounding works in your favor. It is an unglamorous, almost invisible process, but it is extraordinarily powerful. Excitement may bring headlines, but patience and rationality bring freedom. In the end, the philosophy of enough and the art of not being stupid are inseparable. Enough protects against greed and envy. Avoidance of stupidity protects against recklessness and impulsivity. Together, they form the twin pillars of enduring wealth, dignity, and independence. Charlie believed that anyone who internalized this approach, particularly after 50, could secure not only financial freedom, but also a life of quiet satisfaction and agency. He often concluded with a simple reflection: brilliance is rare, luck is fleeting, but the ability to avoid disaster is timeless. Avoid the mistakes that can destroy decades of effort. Live below your means, invest prudently, choose partners wisely, and let compounding do its quiet, relentless work. That is the path to enduring wealth. That is the path to a dignified life. That is the philosophy of enough. And above all, remember, not being stupid is not the same as being brilliant, but it may be the single most effective strategy for surviving, thriving, and enjoying the late game of life.